Matthew Kotoff was no hero, no warrior, no mage, just a tailor who could tell 95 thread cotton from 98 by touch alone. His family had run a small atelier for 30 years, and he had inherited it along with the debts, the creaking floorboards, and one rule his grandfather drilled into him. Thread does not forgive haste. Rush it and it snaps exactly when you need it most. He remembered that rule better than his own school teacher's name. His father had died young. His mother had gone to live with her sister in another city, and the atelier was the only thing left tying him to his family. Neighboring workshops closed one after another around him, unable to compete with factory tailoring, and people stopped valuing handwork entirely. Matthew kept going anyway, not because he believed in profit, but because he did not know how to do anything else. On the third night running without sleep, finishing a wedding dress for a morning ceremony, a storm broke over the city. The old wiring in the workshop could not take it. Matthew shielded the dress with his own body as sparks rained down from the shelving. Himself, he did not manage to save. The last thing he remembered was the smell of burning insulation and one thought, hoping the dress was still okay. He opened his eyes, not in a hospital, not in darkness, but on cold stone, in unfamiliar clothes, under a sky with two moons. A translucent panel hovered in front of him, as if someone had hung a phone screen in the air. It told him he was alive, in a world called Gardein, his class undetermined, and that a unique passive skill called Mastery of Thread had already activated. Standard classes, warrior, mage, priest, were unavailable to him. A hidden development path had opened instead. He decided he had either lost his mind or genuinely died and landed somewhere strange, and chose not to panic, because panic does not sew buttons. He got up and looked around. Stone ruins overgrown with moss, a road in the distance, and somewhere out there, apparently, dragons and magic and a leveling system. A second panel showed his stats: strength 8, low, manual dexterity 97, exceptional, endurance 41, average, magic 0. A hidden stat called sincerity affected every social and production outcome, its actual value unknown even to him. The line about sincerity made him laugh despite everything. 30 years in the trade, and the one stat worth leveling was the thing his grandfather had hammered into him at the sewing machine. A merchant caravan picked him up on the road to the capital of the Kingdom of Artel. The driver, an old man named Horm, explained that a person's worth here came from class and magic rank, revealed at 16 through an awakening ritual. Warriors fought monsters, mages wove spells, priests healed. Anyone who awakened without a combat class was written off as an empty, fit only for grunt work. Matthew asked what happened to an empty with an actual trade. Horm told him a trade without a class was like a song without a voice. Pretty maybe, but nobody cared. In the capital, he was taken for a vagrant and placed as an apprentice with a tailor named Givis, the only work open to someone like him. Local tailors sewed from ready-made fabric bought through the guilds and understood almost nothing about what made threads strong or elastic. Their magical fabrics held together thanks to enchantments, while the actual cut and stitching stayed mediocre compared to what Matthew had seen on Earth. The other apprentices, everyone holding at least a minor gift, mocked the empty, tangled his threads, and ruined his pattern markings for sport. Matthew never answered back. He picked up the fallen spool, untangled it by candlelight in the evening, and kept working. Gradually, his pieces turned out sturdier and neater than the gifted apprentice's own, and the mockery curdled first into wary respect, then into envy. Within 6 months, he was the best apprentice in the workshop, though formally, he had no right to sign his own work at all. Nobles began ordering clothes specifically through the shop, paying triple the going rate, never knowing the hand stitching their garments belonged to an empty. This is what ruined him. An order came in from Baroness Lattimore, wife of a rival of the powerful Baron Oswald Rink, wanting a doublet that would outshine every noble at the spring reception. Gevis, aware of his nameless apprentice's talent, assigned the commission to Matthew, promising him a cut of the payment he never intended to pay. The Baroness asked who had actually made it, since the cut was flawless, better than anything from the capital's own court tailors. Gevis claimed, hastily, that he had personally overseen every stitch. Matthew stood off to the side with his head bowed, saying nothing, though the Baroness noticed the small, telling movement of his hands as she praised the work. At the reception, Baron Lattimore looked so impeccable in that doublet that Rank could not hide his wounded pride in front of the whole court. Rank had competed with Lattimore for the king's favor for years, and a commoner's stitching outdoing his own tailor was the final insult. He cooked up an accusation that Matthew had stolen rare fabric from the guild warehouse. There was no real proof, only a bribed clerk who found silk scraps planted in his bag. The royal court did not bother digging deeper. Givis, afraid of losing his own patent, confirmed the accusation instead of defending his apprentice. Banishment from the kingdom was the verdict. Guards marched Matthew through the gates, while the crowd jeered that he should go sew himself a shroud in the woods. He did not defend himself. He gathered his one bundle of tools, needles, scissors, a thimble, a stub of chalk, and walked toward the forest nobody entered. The lands of the outcasts. For 3 days he walked with no map and no destination, just putting distance between himself and a kingdom that had spat him out like a used thread. He slept in tree hollows and ate berries he half recognized. On the second night, he dreamed of his grandfather mending an old shirt in silence. Good work is never wasted, his grandfather told him in the dream, even when no one sees it. On the third night, he heard a scream that was not human. He found the source by a stream, a young spider woman, half human and half giant spider, caught by the leg in a poacher's trap. 8 limbs, a chitinous carapace, but a face entirely girlish and frightened, framed by dark hair. She recoiled at the sight of him, warning him off, certain he had come for her hide and her silk, the way humans always did in that forest. Matthew could have walked away. 3 months earlier, he had been thrown out as an empty himself, a second-class creature, and he recognized that exact look. He knelt beside the trap and pried it open with his bare hands, saying nothing. The metal bit into his palms, but he did not let go until the spring gave way. She asked, whispering, still not believing it, why a human would help her at all. He told her the trap was badly made, the kind poachers set who did not care who ended up in it, and that once, nobody had helped him either. She let him examine the leg warily. No fracture, just a deep gash. He tore off part of his own shirt and bandaged it as carefully as he would any ordinary wound. A system window flared in front of him, fully visible for the first time. A function called Thread of the Heart. If a member of the arachnid race became sincerely attached to him, the silk she produced increased without limit. Her current rank was the lowest there was. Her potential at full attachment was the highest known, lighter than silk and stronger than tempered steel. No one else in this world was aware the mechanic even existed. Matthew stared at the window so long she assumed he had frozen in disgust. The truth was stranger. His whole path to power here ran through caring for girls the kingdom despised. He was not a cynic. He was a tailor, and the tailor in him understood immediately he was holding the rarest material in the known world, and there was only one honest way to get it. She told him he was strange, that most humans who saw her ran or reached for a weapon. He told her most humans had never seen how people reacted to a strange man like him either, and asked whether her village was far. Far enough, she said warily, that a human was better off not going there. The journey took 2 more days. Aranea led him along winding trails on purpose, keeping the village's exact location hidden from any tracker who might follow. By the fire, she asked him to tell her about his world, the place a man came from who did not flinch at a spider. He told her his world was not perfect either. People there feared the different too, just in different shapes, not 8 legs, but skin, language, faith. Being a tailor with no diploma from a fashion academy had been reason enough for some people to look down on him, no less than how empties were treated here. She said he had simply traded one kind of contempt for another. He admitted that was probably true, but at least here he understood the rules from the start. Back home, he had spent 30 years thinking he just was not trying hard enough. On the second day of travel, they ran into a pack of forest hounds, mutated, spiked, and dangerous. Aranea, still weakened by her leg, could not fight at full strength. Matthew had no weapon and no combat class, so he did the only thing he knew, weaving a crude tripwire from ordinary thread between 2 trunks. It bought them precious seconds until Aranea recovered enough to drive the creatures off with a web spit of her own. She asked, breathing hard, whether he understood what he had just done, turning thread into a weapon. He told her he had used the only thing he had on hand, and honestly, had not been sure it would even work. It was not a heroic feat. It was a small, desperate improvisation, and it was the first time she seriously considered he might really be different. The village of Keliris was a dome of web structures hidden deep in the thicket, several hundred spiderfolk exiled at some point for the simple fact of how they looked. Matthew was met with no bread and no salt. The guard captain, Liz, an 8-legged warrior with blades in place of her front limbs, pinned him to a tree trunk with silk the moment he appeared. The last time humans came here, she told him, it was with torches and crossbows. Aranea said he had saved her from a trap and asked nothing in return, had not even asked her name until the bandage was finished. Humans always ask for something eventually, Liz answered, not loosening her grip, just not right away. Her mistrust was not baseless stubbornness. 3 generations ago, she had lost her mother and 2 sisters in a single day to monster hunters from a neighboring barony. She survived only by hiding under an oak's roots with a hand clamped over her own mouth until the screaming stopped. Ever since, she had sworn no human would ever cross that boundary again while she lived and could still hold a weapon. Elder Mother Sylvana, the village matriarch, came out to the border herself, tall and gray-haired, scarred in ways that had clearly not come from a peaceful life. "Let him down," she told Liz. A man meaning harm would not have bothered tending a stranger's wound where no one could see him do it. "Trusting humans cost us half our population 3 generations ago," Liz answered, with respect. "I remember that better than you do, child," Sylvana said, "which is exactly why I am proposing not blind trust, but a trial." Matthew would stay a week under watch. The first hint of hostility would end with him escorted out of the forest, and lucky if he left alive at all. Matthew agreed to every condition. He had no money, no weapon, no magic, only a bundle of needles and the stubbornness of a man twice thrown out for who he was not. On the second day, he noticed something nobody in the village had ever bothered to name. The spider women wove thread economically but crudely, with no real understanding of tension, density, or weave angle, instinct instead of craft. Talking with the elders, he learned each of them could already spin more than one kind of thread without realizing it mattered. A taut strand for anchoring a web, a stickier, stretchier strand for catching prey, a soft padded strand used only for wrapping eggs. 3 different silks from 3 different glands, used on pure instinct, and nobody had ever once compared them side by side. He remembered, half amused, a documentary he had barely watched once, about how real spiders on Earth were never farmed the way silkworms were. A room full of caterpillars stayed calm, eating mulberry leaves side by side. A room full of spiders usually ended the night with 1 spider and a lot of empty silk. Here, that problem simply did not exist, because the spinners were people, not livestock. For the first time, he understood Kaliris was not sitting on a magical fluke at all. It was sitting on the one condition that made an entire industry possible: cooperation instead of a cage. He asked Aranea for a spool of ordinary thread and sat by the fire braiding a small bracelet. No spell involved, just 30 years of practiced tension and a neat knot. A young spider girl named Pia caught him at it, the youngest weaver in the village, not yet trusted with real work. "What is that knot?" she asked. She had never seen anything like it. He told her it was called a flat braid, used back home to bind fabric edges so they would not fray, and offered to show her. Pia sat with him against her elder's warnings and spent the whole evening learning the new knot, turning out to be a surprisingly capable student. When he finished the bracelet and handed it to Aranea, she stared at the pattern in silence for a long moment. "This is our own thread," she said finally, "but it looks completely different, stronger, more beautiful," as if he knew something about silk that even they did not. It was the first stitch that joined 2 worlds. A week turned into a month. Sylvana let him stay, impressed by the respect he showed for the craft and for the women who practiced it. He fixed up a small workshop at the edge of the village and rebuilt an old loom from scraps at an abandoned sawmill nearby. But the real breakthrough did not happen in the workshop. It happened between Matthew and Aranea, evening after evening, mending clothes, trading stories. She told him she had been cast out of her home hive even before meeting him, not by humans, by her own kind, for being too soft to matter to a race of warriors. "Softness is not weakness," he told her. "The strongest seams are never made by pulling with all your strength, only by knowing when to ease the tension. No human has ever spoken to me the way you do," she said, "as if I am not a spider, but a person." "You are a person," he told her. 8 legs are just a particular cut." Aranea laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a long while, and the system window flared brighter than it ever had. Her attachment jumped from 68% to 91 in a single evening. Her thread rank climbed straight from the lowest grade almost to the top. The new rank was 4 times lighter than linen and resistant to cuts from ordinary weapons, and a new passive ability arrived with it. Sewing speed up 30%, defect rate down 90. Matthew took the spool she had just spun and felt the difference physically, almost weightless, yet impossible to tear by hand no matter how hard he tried. He stitched a small pouch from it to test the load. 3 stones did not stretch it. An anvil, borrowed from the village blacksmith, did not tear the seams either. If this is pushed to its true limit, he told himself quietly, it could be stronger than steel and lighter than silk, and nobody in the world knows it exists yet. A new note explained the full rank ladder, 9 grades from the lowest to the absolute peak. Each rank required not just one woman's attachment, but his own growth too. Sewing mastery, standing in the village, trust from the whole race at once. Reaching the very top would take more than one spider woman sincerely attached to him. A monopoly on a single heart did not scale. An empire required many threads. He was not the kind of man who chased a harem for its own sake, but he was a tailor, and a tailor knows one spool is not a bolt of cloth. A bolt is woven from many threads laid together. He made himself one rule that night and repeated it to himself for the rest of his life. Never fake it for the sake of rank, sincerity only, or nothing at all. Before he ever opened a shop, the village had its first real crisis, one that had nothing to do with thread at all. The only well, shared by everyone, started producing murky, foul-smelling water, its source apparently corrupted somewhere upstream. Without clean water, the village will not last a month, Sylvana warned him, no matter what we produce. This is more dangerous than any baron. Matthew knew nothing about groundwater, but 30 years of craft had taught him to find the source before treating the symptom. He and Aranea, whose knowledge of the tunnels beneath the village outpaced any humans, went down into old passages dug by earlier generations. Something dead down here, she said. A large animal, probably fallen into a side tunnel and dropped straight into the water channel. They found the carcass of a forest boar wedged in a narrow passage, blocking and fouling the flow. Pulling it free by force, risked collapsing the rock overhead. Matthew proposed something nobody expected, a strong but flexible net sling woven from thread, able to wrap the whole carcass without disturbing the arches above it. "You are not a warrior or a mage," Aranea told him afterward, hauling the carcass clear with 2 other women, "but you solve problems in a way that explains why they threw you out." "Maybe," he answered, "but here it seems, they know exactly what to do with me." The water cleared within 3 days. The gesture, with no benefit to his own craft at all, did more for the village's trust than months of conversation could have. With Sylvana's permission, Matthew opened a small workshop right at the village boundary, where an old trail still connected the outcasts to the wider world. Humans on this side of the forest feared spider folk, he reasoned, but humans on any side of the world adored quality goods. If he could sell clothing stitched from spider silk without revealing its origin, the village would gain legitimate income, and he would gain a steady stream of orders. The first gloves, belts, and cloaks were made from thread supplied by several village women, including a taciturn scout named Kara, the only one who traded with humans directly. Kara doubted the whole venture from the start. "Humans will burn your shop down the moment they figure out where the thread comes from," she warned him. "My brother disappeared that way 3 years ago." That evening, watching him calmly mend a torn harness, she finally let herself finish the story. Her brother Oren, a scout like her, had gone out for salt and never returned. A month later, she found only a rumor, a collector paying an absurd sum for a rare giant spider's hide. She had never been able to bury him according to her people's customs, and every trip out among humans since had cost her something she never fully got back. "I am sorry," Matthew told her. "I cannot give you back what was taken, but I can make sure no one else of yours goes missing alone if the village has a reason to be needed instead of hunted." Kara scoffed, but stayed to watch him work anyway. Fast and precise, never a wasted motion. By the end of the second week, she caught herself looking forward to the evenings, bringing him not just working thread, but rare scraps of metal and fabric from her trips. "Told the merchant I was buying for my mistress," she said once, dropping a spiral weave sample on his counter. He never even thought to ask who she was. "Excellent sample," Matthew told her, studying the weave. "We could borrow that spiral technique for the cloaks." A new system window appeared. Attachment detected, 12% and rising. Her thread trait, increased elasticity, ideal for bowstrings, straps, armor joints. Matthew understood the system did not demand pretense from him. It demanded the same thing his old craft always had: sincerity, patience, respect for the material. Except now the material was not just fabric, it was the trust of living beings. While the shop was new, young Pia, still considered too young for real commissions, begged Matthew to trust her with one alone, a simple belt for a village hunter. "I promise I will not let you down," she told him. "I have been practicing on scraps for 3 weeks." "I do not doubt your hands," he answered. "I only wonder whether you will give yourself time to do it right instead of fast." The belt came out sturdy, with one nearly invisible flaw she alone noticed after the hunter had already taken it home, pleased. "There's an uneven stitch on the 3rd loop," she told Matthew in a panic. "I ruined my first real commission." "The flaw is only visible to someone who made it and knows exactly where to look," he told her. "The customer is happy, the belt is sturdy, the work was honest." "A mistake is not the same thing as a failure," he said. "You notice something no one else will, except your future self, who will do it better." Pia carried that lesson for the rest of her life, and it was exactly this habit, owning a mistake instead of hiding it, that later made her the one Matthew trusted with quality control. His first outside customer arrived by accident. An adventuring party, escorting a merchant caravan, was ambushed by swamp creatures a mile from the forest's edge. A young warrior named Darian took a wound ordinary leather could not withstand. Matthew grabbed a spool of finished thread and a first aid kit and ran toward the fighting without hesitation. He did not fight, that was never his strength, but while Liss and 2 others drove the creatures off, he closed Darian's wound with a stitch of spider silk. "This does not tear," Darian said, wincing. "Holds tighter than our field medic's own work." "It is just a good stitch," Matthew told him, "and good material." The party's leader, a pragmatic old merchant named Guildmaster Dorn, felt the bandage resist every attempt to tear it and realized he had stumbled onto something rare. "Where did you get this material, master?" he asked. "That is the workshop's secret," Matthew told him, "but I am willing to discuss supply if the guild will pay and stop asking too many questions about its origin." "Young man," Dorn said, narrowing his eyes, "I have traded for 40 years. I respect a secret worth more than gold, more than I respect the gold itself. They last longer. Let us draw up a contract." Dorn did not press hard on the material's origin. Profit interested him more than morality, and he offered a batch contract in exchange for protecting Matthew from local barons and tax collectors. Matthew agreed. It was his first real victory, not over a monster, not over an army, but over the world system that had once thrown him out through the gates. Within 3 months, the light, unbreakable southern fabric, as Matthew called it to hide its true origin, became an object of desire for nobles and mercenaries across the region. A cloak that stopped an arrow, gloves a dagger could not cut, all of it 3 times lighter than ordinary leather armor. For the first time in decades, the village had a stable source of income, gold and tools and medicine that once had to be stolen or bartered for at mortal risk. Among the first noble customers was Countess Irma Vallon, sharp-minded, known for asking uncomfortable questions more readily than she paid her bills. She ordered a gown light enough to wear, yet dense enough to hide light armor underneath, genuinely fearing an assassination attempt from her husband's rivals. "Rumor has it, your fabric does not come from an ordinary loom," she told Matthew. "Rumors do not scare me. What interests me is whether it works the way people say." "The origin is my concern, my lady," he answered. "The quality is something you can verify yourself the moment you put the dress on." The Countess tested it herself, having a guard strike the hem lightly with a blunt blade. The fabric did not give. Against Matthew's expectations, she did not demand the secret. She paid generously and spread word through high society, securing the workshop's fame before Dorn's guild could even expand. Fame attracts more than buyers, though. Rival guildmasters and baronial agents began asking where the master of southern fabric had come from and why his shop stood at the edge of a cursed forest. One agent, a mercenary named Grout, tracked Kara on one of her trips and tried to follow her home. "You have wandered somewhere you should not have, human," Liss told him, intercepting him at the border. "I am only looking for the source of the strongest fabric in the kingdom," Grout said. "Tell your master we can arrange things nicely, or otherwise." Liss did not negotiate. She threw him back onto the road and snapped both of his crutch staffs on the way out. The incident showed Matthew and Sylvana plainly that the secret would not hold much longer. Nor was the village itself entirely at peace. Some elders, distrustful of humans on principle, demanded a council, wondering whether it was time to expel the human before disaster followed him in. "Every gold coin we take from humans is a rope they will one day use to hang us," an elder named Vorn warned the council. "Mark my words, trouble comes faster than benefit." "Trouble was already here before him, Vorn," Sylvana answered. "We simply used to endure it silently instead of fighting back. Let him show that silence is not the only path." Matthew understood the time had come to build real defenses, both physical and political. The village of outcasts could no longer hide. It needed to become a force worth respecting. While Aranea and Kara grew close to Matthew through craft and conversation, Liss kept a demonstrative distance, distrustful of any human at all. But Matthew noticed her armor, chitin, in old leather, was too heavy for a fighting style built on speed and sharp lunges. "Your armor is slowing you down," he told her. "You fight for speed, but you are wearing gear built for endurance." "Not your place to judge my fighting, Taylor," she snapped. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can stitch you something that will not get in your way. For free, just try it." Liss refused 3 times. On the 4th, after a skirmish with Rink's scouts nearly cost her an arm because her heavy armor slowed her reaction, she brought him her old gear in silence. He built her something half the weight from high-rank thread and flexible plating, following blueprints he still remembered from historical fencing courses back home. "I do not feel the weight," she admitted, for the first time without sarcasm. like nothing is on at all. That is exactly how armor should feel, he told her. It protects you. It does not restrain you. That old wound was exactly why the next test came from somewhere Liz had not braced for. Not a blade, not a human, but her own people. That same week, the village's young fighters, inspired by her, began training too aggressively in the new gear and getting hurt from bad technique. I know how to fight, Liz admitted, at a loss. I do not know how to explain fighting without tearing off somebody's leg. Teaching is a craft too, Matthew told her. Let me help with the explanation. You handle the demonstration. That is how every apprentice ever learned from me. Together, they built a simple training system. Warm up, drill the basics, only then spar. Injuries among the young fighters dropped by 2/3 within a month. In gratitude, Liz offered him something no one in the village had ever offered a human: basic self-defense lessons. Not because she believed the tailor would become a warrior, but because she had seen exactly how defenseless he stood whenever real danger was close. You do not have to fight, she told him, but you do have to hold out a few seconds until one of us gets there. Next time, no one may be nearby. Reasonable, he answered, though I doubt I will make even a mediocre fighter. You are not meant to become a fighter, she said. It is enough that you stop being easy prey. Morning training became another quiet ritual between them, and Liz, used to seeing strength as the only language worth respecting, discovered another kind entirely: plain persistence. For a classless man, she told him once, watching him get up for the 6th time in a row, you are surprisingly stubborn. Stubbornness is the only class I was ever born with, he answered. From that day, she was the first one standing at his workshop door at night, just in case, as she put it. In truth, because someone finally treated her strength as a virtue, not a threat. As the village's trust grew, Matthew organized something like a real workshop floor. Women bringing their own thread voluntarily, learning technique instead of pure instinct. He paid a fair share of every item sold, and the village watched gold flow back into new homes. Medicine for the elderly, tools for hunting. Pia by then had become his right hand for quality control, the first to spot a defect, an uneven weave, a weak knot. He taught them the distinctions he had learned at his own grandfather's elbow. A twist is not just a twist. Thread spun clockwise, an S-twist, behaves differently under strain than thread spun counterclockwise, a Z-twist. Mixing the two deliberately in the same weave made cloth resist tearing in both directions instead of just one. He showed them the difference between a plain weave, thread crossing over under over in the simplest pattern, and a twill, woven on a diagonal, that draped better and hid wear longer. The same weave humans use back home for denim and fine wool suits alike. None of it required magic. All of it was 2,000 years of ordinary trial and error. To the spider women hearing it for the first time from a man who treated it as sacred, it might as well have been. If we want the thread's quality to grow with the village, he told Sylvana, we need a school, not scattered lessons by the fire. A school for a race humans considered fit only for web spinning and forest survival, Sylvana said. That would be poetic. Thus was born the prototype of what would become the future Kel Iris Craft School, a lean-to shed and a dozen students of every age. Growth brought its first internal problem too. A batch spun by new workers came out defective, thin sections that snapped under strain, threatening the whole contract with Dorn. Half the batch for the guild is unusable, Pia told him in a panic. If we miss the shipment, Dorn might cancel everything. No panic, Matthew told her. First, we find the cause of the defect. Then, we fix the symptom. Show me who wove these spools. It turned out new workers, rushing to keep pace with quota, had been skipping the tension check step entirely. Matthew did not punish anyone. He and Pia built a simple double-check system instead, every spool inspected twice by 2 different pairs of hands. You are not just selling our silk, Sylvana told him, watching the mistake get corrected. You are giving my people their pride back and teaching us not to fear our own mistakes. I'm just doing what I know how, he answered. The rest is on all of you. The batch was saved, the shipment went out on time, and Dorn, hearing the reason for the delay, only laughed and tripled the next order. Any merchant knows, he told Matthew, that whoever honestly fixes the defect instead of hiding it can be trusted with bigger batches. Not every visitor after that was honest. A merchant named Felix appeared, offering suspiciously generous prices to buy thread wholesale straight from the source. Karen noticed his boots were too clean for a man who claimed to have walked through the forest. His hands too soft for a real peddler. He is not a merchant, she whispered to Matthew. Probably a spy from a guild that has caught the scent of money. Matthew did not make a scene. He walked Felix through exactly what any curious buyer would see. Finished goods, ordinary looms, nothing of the real mechanic behind them. Felix left empty-handed, and Liz escorted him to the road, making it plain the village was watching the world just as closely as the world watched it. Baron Oswald Rank, the same man who had engineered Matthew's banishment, was watching the fabric market more closely than most. Part of his own income depended on a monopoly over expensive materials for the nobility, and the southern fabric undermined that twice over once he learned whose hands were behind it. That very same classless tailor I banished from the capital, Rank said, grew rich selling rags to peasants. Unthinkable. He bribed a clerk in Dorn's guild for the truth and began assembling a mercenary force, securing a royal audience to frame the coming attack as a cleansing of a monster nest. A court mage named Magister Trevin, more curious about the fabric's nature than its profit, asked for a sample before Rank destroyed the source entirely. If the fabric really surpasses the Mage Guild's enchanted materials, Trevin told him, I would like to study it before you decide to destroy it along with its source. Study it if you wish, Rank answered. But the source is a nest of monsters, and I intend to rid the kingdom of it, securing the whole monopoly in the process. Trevin spent the night before departure nearly sleepless, torn between scientific curiosity and instinct telling him this would end in slaughter, not a cleansing. If I stay behind, he told himself, the Baron will simply bring someone less scrupulous. Maybe it is better to soften the worst from within than to wash my hands of it entirely. That choice, made quietly and alone, would later shape both his surrender during the siege and his testimony at the trial that followed. Dorn, unwilling to lose his best supplier despite his own greed, warned Matthew in secret that Rank was marching with a company, perhaps 10 days out. I cannot openly oppose a nobleman, Dorn told him at the forest's edge, at night. But I have no intention of losing the best supplier on the continent either. Get ready. There was no time left for doubt. The village had to become more than a workshop. It had to become a fortress. On the last quiet evening before the attack, Aranea found Matthew mending armor for a young fighter whose hands trembled with anticipation, not fatigue. You do not have to stay here tomorrow, she told him. No one would judge a human who chose distance from a fight that is not his people's. I have already been the one thrown out through a gate to a laughing crowd, he told her. I am not about to stand aside again, watching someone else get thrown out or killed. Besides, he added, nodding at a pile of unfinished armor, someone has to patch the seams while all of you fight. Kara found Liz sharpening blades alone at the village border and sat beside her, a rare moment for two women used to relying only on themselves. If I do not make it through tomorrow, Liz told her, not looking up from the whetstone, tell the tailor his armor was the best thing my body ever wore. Tell him yourself, Kara answered. I am not giving speeches over your grave. There will be too much work after the victory for you to die that stupidly. Sylvana walked through every house that night, thanking every resident for their willingness to defend their shared home, whether warrior with a blade or weaver with a needle. Whatever happens tomorrow, she told Matthew at his own door, know this. You have already given this village what decades of solitary survival never could. Hope that hiding is not the only way out. Matthew did not sleep. He checked and rechecked every stitch on the defender's gear, and when the alarm horn sounded at dawn, the whole village met the enemy in readiness, not panic. For 2 weeks they had worked without rest, every able-bodied resident equipped in light, sturdy armor. Lists positioned fighters along the perimeter, according to blueprints Matthew still remembered from old lessons on siege history. Aranea, Kara, and dozens of others wove reinforced web traps, invisible lines strung across the paths, strong enough to hold an armored knight. Pia organized young weavers to keep mending gear round the clock, ready for the middle of battle itself. Preparations were not without friction. Elder Vorn refused at first to allocate his own metal stores toward the fortifications. If we lose, the metal goes to the victor anyway, he argued. Why spend it now? If we do not spend it now, Matthew told him, we lose for certain. Readiness is worth more than savings. No one will be left to spend. Sylvana ordered Vorn to fall in with the plan, and once he saw the finished fortifications, he admitted, against his own expectations, that it would work. On the night of the attack, Rink's force, some 40 mercenaries and a dozen armored knights, entered the forest confident of an easy victory over a nest of monsters. Trevin rode alongside them, armed not with a sword, but with amulets built for analyzing magical materials. They were wrong. The first line hit invisible web traps in the dark, torches snagging and going out one by one, cries of ambush spreading faster than any commander could reorganize. The second line broke against defenders, whose new armor turned blades that would have torn straight through ordinary leather. A young fighter named Drake, who had nearly lost a limb a month earlier in heavy gear, now moved so fast the mercenaries could not predict his next strike. Pia crawled between cover points with spare spools of thread, patching torn armor on the run, keeping fighters whole between blows. Hold on, she told one, stitching a slashed shoulder guard mid-battle. 3 more stitches and you are whole again. Rink, watching from a distance, felt for the first time not superiority, but fear. This is impossible, he said. Simple spiders cannot hold their own against trained knights. This thread genuinely does not respond to my analytical enchantments, Trevon admitted, examining a scrap taken from a captured mercenary. Whatever produces this surpasses any magical fabric I know. Liz faced the Baron's knight captain in the village center, and Matthew's light armor made the difference, letting her outpace an opponent used to relying on weight for protection. When the captain fell, and more than half the force lay tangled or routed, Rank tried to flee. The village itself intercepted him. Trevon surrendered without resistance from the start, raising his hands. I am no warrior, master, he told Matthew. I came for knowledge, not blood. Spare me, and I am willing to testify who truly planned this attack. You, Rank said, humiliated. That same tailor, you cannot do this to me. I am a nobleman of this kingdom. A year ago, you declared me a thief and threw me out without a shred of proof, Matthew told him. Today, you came to kill a defenseless village for growing rich through honest work. The difference between us, he said, is that I never needed to destroy others to feel great. Matthew let him go that same night, stripped of his weapons and his mercenaries, but not of his title or his court seat. It was not mercy so much as arithmetic. A dead baron in a spider forest would have brought the crown's full army down on Kaliris within a month. A humiliated, disarmed baron would first have to explain his failure to a king who had never approved the campaign in writing. Watching him stumble back toward the road with what remained of his dignity, Matthew understood he had only won the first exchange. A man who has already lost everything once rarely stops at losing it a second time, he thought. He simply stops announcing it in advance. News of the victory spread faster than the fabric itself. For some, it became a legend of justice. For others, an unsettling sign that a despised race had gained real strength. Trevon, released as a gesture of good faith, kept his word and testified against the Baron, explaining the expedition's true purpose: personal gain and revenge, not the kingdom's defense. The court fined Rank heavily and stripped his mercenary charter, though a Baron's seat, once granted, was not so easily undone by a single testimony. The council settled for censure and a fine, not forfeiture, a distinction that would matter more than anyone in that courtroom expected. It was then that someone no one had seen in decades returned to the village: Sylvana's older sister, once the true ruler of the race, Hive Queen Zabrina. She had left after the first great persecution by humans, and now she had heard of the victory and of the man who had made it possible. I heard of a tailor who restored my people's dignity, she said. I want to see him with my own eyes. The Hive Queen's line carried thread of supreme potential, once used, legend said, to weave the armor of kings. Decades of exile and mistrust had frozen that potential at the lowest rank, status notwithstanding. She distrusted the ease with which the village had accepted a human, and set Matthew a test of her own, alone, without help, to mend an ancient torn tapestry no one dared touch. If you are truly a master, she told him, and not just a lucky craftsman, prove it on something valuable, not in gold, but in memory. For 3 nights, he worked the tapestry, studying the old pattern thread by thread, restoring the lost sections until the seam was indistinguishable from the original. You did not just patch a hole, Zabrina told him, quiet, standing before the restored relic. You gave back something we thought was lost forever. She told him then what she had never told even her own sister. Decades earlier, as a young ruler, she had opened trade with a human settlement, hoping honesty would prevent more persecution. The humans took the gifts, promised peace, then led a bounty hunting party against the Hive once they knew its location. Dozens died, including her own younger sister. The Council of Elders blamed her for the trust that had cost so many lives, and she left before they could formally exile her, unwilling to be a living reminder of the mistake. Since then, she told him, I swore never to trust a human enough to risk another life of my people. You are the first I have allowed myself to ask this question of in over 60 years. Then the mistake was never in trust itself, Matthew told her, only in whom exactly you trusted. Trust rightly placed, backed by the will to defend yourself, is not weakness. You are not afraid of us, she said, not afraid of what we could do to a human if we chose to. Why? Because I have already seen what it is like to be feared and despised simply for who you are, he told her. I do not want to be another one who does that to someone else. The moment she wove sincerely for the first time in decades, the village's combined thread rank reached its absolute peak. 3 times lighter than silk, 5 times stronger than tempered steel, resistant even to magical influence. Matthew held a spool that weighed less than a glove and shrugged off a battle axe strike without a single scratch, silent for a full minute. 30 years of tailoring on Earth, a year of wandering this world, had led him to a material no blacksmith or mage had ever dreamed of, and only he knew the secret behind it. The village marked the reunion of the 2 sisters with its first true celebration in decades. Roasted game, honey cakes, old lullabies nobody had heard sung since before the exile. For many years, we survived by hiding, Sylvana told the gathering, from a world that decided to fear us without reason. Today, we do not hide. Today, the world came to us, with respect, not torches. I left this people believing my guilt made me unfit to lead, Sabrina told them. A stranger from a world we never even heard of reminded me trust, rightly placed, is the foundation the future is built on. Today I return, not as your queen, she said, but as one of you, walking beside my sister, toward what we once feared even to look at. Later, apart from the noise, the two sisters spoke alone for the first time in decades. All these years, I was angry you left me to pick up the pieces, Sylvana admitted. Only now do I understand. You did not leave us. You left your own guilt because you did not know how to live beside it. Forgive me, sister, Sabrina said, for all the years you carried the burden alone. I forgive you, Sylvana told her. But promise me that next time the world feels unbearable, you come toward me, not turn your back on it. The victory and the achievement of the highest thread rank had not gone unnoticed beyond Artel's borders. The northern kingdom of Dringard, whose economy rested on heavy armor and weapons, saw Kel Iris as a direct threat to its own military dominance. Instead of negotiating, its council sent an official delegation with an ultimatum: exclusive supply rights, or the kingdom would treat the nest of monsters as a threat to the whole continent. My king is not accustomed to asking twice, the ambassador told Matthew. Either we become your sole buyer, or your little village learns what the wrath of a truly large army feels like. What no one in that hall knew yet, not Matthew, not Sabrina, not even the king, was that the ambassador's hardline had not come from Dringard's council alone. A courier's route, traced much later, showed a single unsigned letter reaching the Dringard court 3 weeks earlier, urging the kingdom to press its claim before the southern kingdoms armed themselves. The seal wax, once identified, matched a pattern belonging to exactly one disgraced household, still clinging to whatever influence it had left. Matthew felt something closer to weary recognition than fear. The same tone of superiority Rank had used 2 years earlier, now backed by an entire kingdom. Tell your king, he answered. The house of Kel Iris sells no one exclusivity, not for gold, not under threat of the sword, but it remains open to honest trade on the same terms as anyone else. If Dringard prefers war to negotiation, he added, its enemies will not be a force full of spiders, but 3 kingdoms whose armies already wear our armor. It was a calculated bluff, but Sabrina backed it with real diplomacy, reaching the courts of Artel and Valdor within days to propose a joint statement. King Artel III, whose own prestige now rested on southern fabric, spoke firmly in the Enclave's defense, and Valdor, remembering a famine cured by new nets, joined without hesitation. Facing a united front instead of a lone village, Dringard backed off the direct threat, settling for a dry, non-exclusive trade agreement. My king will remember this conversation, the ambassador said on parting coldly, not as a defeat, as a lesson that the market changed faster than we thought. Matthew was not fooled. The threat of war had receded, not vanished. Influence and wealth always breed new enemies. To cement the diplomatic win, Sabrina arranged for the respected Order of the Silver Blade to test the armor themselves, with no staged demonstration at all. We have heard too many rapturous rumors, Master Kotov, their Grandmaster told him, to take them on faith. The Order tests gear as if lives depend on it, because they do. 3 days of warhammers, crossbow fire, acid vapor, and tinsel loads under a horse's weight left the armor wanting in exactly one measure: fire resistance. Trevin and Arnea set to work on it immediately, proposing an additional layer of treatment. In 30 years of service, the Grandmaster admitted after the trials, I have never seen gear pass such trials with such confidence. The Order will recommend your products to every knightly house on the continent. The endorsement did more for Kel Iris's international reputation than months of negotiation ever could have managed alone. Demand soared so fast the village could barely keep pace, and growth brought problems nobody had faced before. Caravans carrying finished goods began attracting bandits who had heard about the cargo's value. One caravan, escorted by Kara, was ambushed 2 days from home. We nearly got taken at Wolf's Gorge, she told Matthew afterward, shaken but unharmed. Good thing the armor held, or I would not have made it back to warn the others in time. Then solo caravans are no longer an option, Matthew told her. We need permanent escorts and a different route. He and Liz organized an armed escort of trained fighters and arranged with Dorn to change routes and add extra guards at the most dangerous points. 2 weeks later, the same gang tried again, unaware the wagons were now escorted by 6 fighters in high-rank armor under Liz's own command. Losing half their number in minutes, the bandits fled, leaving behind loot from earlier raids. Who arms ordinary merchants like this? The bandit leader shouted, retreating. Merchants protected by an entire village, Liz called after him with a calm smirk. Choose your targets more carefully next time. Word of the rout at Wolf's Gorge spread fast among other crews, and for years afterward, Kellyris caravans were among the safest on the whole continent. The second problem proved far more delicate, an internal one. You are later than the caravan needed you to be, Aranea told Kara one evening, not looking up from a pile of finished cloaks. The route is longer now because of the bandits, Kara answered. You know that. I know the route, Aranea said. I also know you took the evening shift twice this week when it was not yours to take. Would you rather someone else guard him? Kara snapped, sharper than she meant to. Someone who does not know Wolf's Gorge well enough to spot an ambush before it springs? Neither of them raised her voice past that, which was the strange part. No shouting, no blades bared, just two women unsure how to share the one thing neither had asked to want. Pia, sorting spools nearby, said nothing to either of them, but told Matthew plainly that evening that something between them had gone quiet in a way that worried her. Matthew gathered all three together. I do not want tension between you because of me, he told them. I value each of you for who you are, not for how much thread you bring in. If my attention has been uneven, that is my fault to fix. We're not asking you to divide yourself up like goods on a scale, Aranea told him. It is just frightening to think there might be no room left for something real. I have never been afraid of a bandit crew, Kara admitted quietly for the first time. I did not expect to be afraid of an empty evening instead. The conversation stayed honest instead of curdling into rivalry, and Matthew began setting aside evenings deliberately, in turn, without rushing, for nothing but conversation. A third problem came from outside entirely. A young weaver named Sela, one of Pia's first students, had left months earlier for a rival guild's promised wages. What she had not told anyone before leaving was that the better pay came with a condition: report back anything useful about the workshop's methods to a merchant who never gave his house a name. She told herself it was gossip for gold, not betrayal, until the thread coming out of her own hands elsewhere turned out worthless. Proof of what she had actually lost. She returned thinner than when she left. I told them about the looms, the schedules, she confessed, unable to look at Sylvana. I did not know that thread coming out of me elsewhere would be worthless. I did not know it would prove I had been talking to. Kara, present for the confession, recognized the buyer's description immediately. The same two clean boots from months before. House Cassell had not given up. It had simply switched from theft to purchase. You did not sell us out for hatred, Sela, Matthew told her. You sold information nobody warned you was dangerous. That is carelessness, not treason, but only if you stop now, out loud. Elder mother, Matthew, she said. I thought it was only about my hands. It turned out it was also about where those hands felt at home. Sylvana led her back to the looms on one condition, that she carry the warning to the council herself about how far House Cassell's patience for honest competition had already worn through. It was a small piece of a larger pattern nobody in the village had fully assembled yet, but it was the second thread pointing toward the same unnamed hand pulling at Kellyris from a distance. The village's prosperity split its council into two camps. Today humans need our thread, and so they smile, Vorn warned. What happens when they find a way to do without us? Those smiles will turn back into old hatred faster than you think. And what happens, Vorn? Sylvana answered. If we hide behind walls again and forget how to be part of the wider world, the fear we pass to our children, they will carry through their whole lives. The argument was settled, unexpectedly, by Pia, given a council voice for the first time as head of the growing crafts. My students, spider and human alike, play in the same yard without once counting legs, she told them. Maybe the question is not whether to roll back openness, but how to build it so it never depends on one man or one lucky deal. The council settled on a compromise, continuing open trade while building crafts independent of human demand, so no future betrayal could push the race back to the edge of survival. Vorn remained skeptical, but admitted, for the first time in a long while, that an open future built with an eye on past mistakes still beat a new solitude. Word of the unbreakable armor reached the small, proud kingdom of Valdor too, which had suffered 3 years of crop failure and rotted fishing nets. A fisherwoman elder named Helga came not with gold, but with a request. Our nets rot in the salt water in a single season, she told Matthew. Our people are starving, not because there is no fish in the sea, but because there is nothing left to catch it with. Matthew, who knew hunger only from history books and his grandfather's stories, could not refuse. He worked with Pia and a group of weavers to build a weave meant for nets rather than armor, blended with cheaper thread to keep the price within reach of ordinary fishermen. It was during that work that a healer named Mira arrived, a rare half-blood relative of Helga's, accepted fully by neither humans nor her own race. I heard that here it does not matter whose blood you are, so long as your hands work honestly, she said. Is that true, or just another fairy tale for the desperate? Come and find out for yourself, Matthew told her. Promises are easy, deeds prove them. She stayed to treat Valdor's exhausted fishermen while the weavers worked, her care for humans and spiders alike, a living example of everything Matthew had built. Not everything on that tour went smoothly. House Cassell, the largest merchant family in the Three Kingdoms, sent an agent posing as a buyer to steal samples and bribe a weaver. Kara caught him at night before he ever reached the warehouse, her senses picking up his scent long before he did. House Castle does not pay generously enough, she told him, pinning him to the wall, sending such a careless man. I am just a merchant looking for samples, he stammered. Merchants do not sneak around at night with lockpicks for warehouse doors, she told him. Come on, you will talk to the master and the elders. What he never volunteered, and what Kara only pieced together weeks later alongside Sela's confession, was who had first pointed House Cassell toward Kel Iris as a target. His contract, traced eventually through a chain of paid intermediaries, led back to the very same disgraced household whose seal had turned up on the letter to Dringer. Matthew, pragmatic rather than harsh, sent the agent home with an offer of honest partnership instead of punishment. House Cassell, judging open hostility with a royal military supplier not worth the cost, signed a secondary distribution agreement rather than continue the feud. Helga wrote to Matthew more than once after returning home with the first batch of new nets, and Mira stayed in Kel Iris for good, opening a small infirmary of her own. While Matthew negotiated with Valdor's council, Kara, finding herself in the very region where her brother had vanished, tracked down an old rare hide buyer named Jarrett. 3 years ago you bought a hide, she told him, restrained though her voice trembled, unusual, large, from hunters at the edge of the Kel Iris forest. That merchandise, he said, paling at her house emblem. I did not know it was a sentient being, my lady. I was told it was a rare beast. I sold it long ago, to a collector from Drengard. I did not kill him, Jarrett told her. I simply did not ask the questions I should have. Kara could have unleashed 3 years of fury on him. Instead, she remembered Matthew's words about mistakes sometimes being nothing more than no one teaching a person to ask the right question. Give me the collector's name, she told him, and from now on, ask where rare goods come from, not for my sake, for whoever is still alive to knock on your door one day. The collector, learning of Kel Iris's growing weight, returned the hide voluntarily within a month, along with an apology Kara accepted, not because it undid anything, but because it let her close a wound. With access to the highest rank of thread, everything changed at once. Dorn became the official trade representative of the newly recognized House of Kel Iris, and Matthew stopped hiding the fabric's origin entirely, since there was nothing left to protect. He established an open policy instead, exclusive material, legal contracts only, any violence against the village, severing every agreement with the offending kingdom. Demand swept the continent, nobles paying fortunes for a cloak that stopped an arrow, adventurers saving for years toward armor no enchantment could match. Trevin, granted permission to study but never replicate the process, became the first human scholar to live permanently in the growing town. A party testing the armor against a young mountain dragon reported its scales failed to bite through where dragon-forged steel had cracked after 3 blows. One mage in the party guessed, not far from the truth, that the material carried some resonance of the sincerity it was made with. The material behaves not like fabric, he wrote in his report, but like something alive, remembering the care put into its making. Science cannot yet explain this in familiar terms. Around this time, Matthew finally built, from memory, a treadle sewing machine like the one in his grandfather's workshop. Cruder than its Earth counterpart, but enough to triple the speed of simple stitching, freeing hands for the complex, soul-requiring work no machine could replace. It sews by itself, Aranea said, watching it run for the first time. Without hands? Not without hands, Matthew told her. The hands guide it now instead of pulling every stitch. Machines like this freed tailors from part of the drudgery, centuries before I was even born. The factory grew into an entire quarter, combat armor under Liss, civilian clothing under Aranea, experimental materials where Pia and Trevan combined thread with rare minerals Kara scouted. Even a small shop for children's clothing appeared, since the village's newest generation was growing up with no memory of ever needing to hide. The culmination came with Kel Iris's first open fair, humans and spiders trading side by side under one canopy for the first time in living memory. I never thought I would be buying clothing directly from the one who made it, a young aristocrat told Aranea, examining a cloak, surprised. Usually, that is a middleman's job. In Kel Iris, she answered, with a faint smile. A master selling her own work is the rule, not the exception. Perhaps your world should pick up that habit. After the fair, Pia's school welcomed adult apprentices from the capital's own guilds too, on one condition, that inside its walls, no one had the right to look down on anyone else. I am being taught by a spider woman half my age, one apprentice admitted. On the first day, bewildered, I admit I do not know what I expected. What matters here is not age or the number of limbs, Pia told him. It is whether your hands are willing to listen to the material instead of arguing with it. That rule is the same for everyone. A month later, he had become one of the school's most diligent students and the first human to earn Kel Ears's own master's mark on his own work. 2 years after his banishment, Matthew returned to the capital, not as a petitioner at the gates, but as the head of the continent's largest trade house. He was invited officially, since Artel could no longer afford to lag behind its neighbors in access to the fabric. Rank, stripped of most of his holdings after the siege and the scandal that followed, still clung to what court influence remained, trying to smear Matthew as a tamer of monsters trading in stolen knowledge. Master Kotov, the king told him, we have heard of your successes. The kingdom is prepared to discuss an exclusive contract for equipping the royal guard. I am prepared to discuss a contract, your majesty, Matthew answered. But I have one condition. Official recognition of the arachnid race as equal citizens, he said. Repeal of every decree permitting them to be hunted as monsters, and a public investigation into the accusation that once had me banished, with the true architect named aloud. On the eve of the audience, Rink, feeling the ground slide from beneath him, made one last desperate attempt. He bribed a junior clerk to plant a forged letter in the archives, claiming Matthew had once conspired with foreign spies, hoping to sow doubt before the old truth could surface. Plant this in the archive today, he whispered to his last loyal servant. Let them find it by chance, right in the middle of the proceedings. The plan failed before it could work. Kara, traveling with the delegation as security, sensed something wrong in the Baron's servants, even on the approach to the city. Without drawing attention, she tracked the clerk to the archive itself, and the forged letter was seized and presented as even more damning evidence against its author. Before the king could rule, Zabrina stepped forward with a second stack of evidence Kara had assembled over 2 months. The courier's route to Dringard. The paid intermediaries linking the Cassell agent's contract back through 3 names to 1. Sila's own written statement, given freely. Your Majesty, Zabrina told the court, the assault on our village was not the last attempt against it. 2 more followed. One at your kingdom's peace with Dringard, one at stealing our trade through House Cassell, both traced to the same seal. Baron Rink, the king said, examining the letters, his expression hardening further. You did not merely fail to accept your banishment's justice 2 years ago. You spent the months since trying to burn down everything that grew from it. I had nothing left but spite, your majesty, Rink answered, no longer performing outrage, only exhaustion. It seemed a fairer trade than watching a tailor's charity outlast a baron's birthright. It was the closest thing to an honest sentence he had spoken in the entire proceeding. Old habits die harder than new evidence lands, though, and a moment later, some flicker of the courtier he had once been pushed him to try once more. Does no one else see what is happening? He demanded of the courtiers directly. A commoner without a class is dictating to the throne. Tomorrow, he will demand spiders sit at the same table as hereditary nobility. Baron, Countess Villan told him, unruffled from her seat, I have been sitting at the same negotiating table as Kelleris's representatives for months now. The sky, as you can see, has not fallen. Restrained laughter rippled through the hall, and it settled the dispute more surely than any argument could have. The investigation ran before the full court, an honest clerk confessing under the weight of evidence, and Master Gevis himself appearing voluntarily to admit the truth. I knew the accusation was false, Gevis told the court, with shame. I was afraid of losing my patent if I stood up for him. There is no excuse for me, but I ask that the truth be told in full. Baron Oswald Rink, the king announced, you are found guilty of perjury, of an unauthorized assault on a recognized trade enclave, of inciting Dringard against a crown trade partner, and of conspiring with House Cassell toward sabotage. Your title and holdings are forfeit. Rink was sentenced not to execution, but to lifelong service at a remote border fortress, barred from court forever. Baron Lattimore, present at the trial, showed no trace of gloating. Master Kotov, I admit I did not stand up for you 2 years ago, though I suspected Rink's lie, he told Matthew quietly, after the verdict. Rivalry blinds faster than one would like to believe. They are worth more than you think, Baron, Matthew told him. Not everyone finds the courage to admit inaction, even when it went unpunished. Standing in the same throne room where he had once been humiliated without a shred of defense, Matthew felt, for a moment, his grandfather beside him again. The man had never taught him revenge, only how to mend, patiently, with no malice in a single stitch. Revenge is a seam sewn in a hurry, boy, his grandfather's voice told him from memory. It never holds long and always shows. Mend it properly, and no one will even remember there was a hole here. Matthew did not feel the triumph he had once imagined. He felt only the calm of a man closing an old wound with a neat, even seam, no loose thread left hanging. I hold no grudge against you, master, he told Gevis after the trial. Fear is a poor advisor, but not a crime. If you ever want to learn to sew properly again, there is always a place at a loom in Kaliris. Even with recognition and peace secured, the Thread Empire was not immune to trials money could not fix. A harsh winter brought an unexplained illness to the youngest weavers, their bodies weakening for no visible reason the village healers could name. I have just been tired lately, Pia admitted weakly, in Aranea's care. Probably too many night shifts at the factory. This is not ordinary fatigue, Matthew told her, worried. 3 workers have the same symptoms. We need to figure this out before it becomes something worse. Trevon went looking for a natural cause first, a bad dye, an unlucky batch. What he found instead left him grim. This is not an oversight, he told Matthew, holding a sample under an analysis amulet. The mineral in this dye is safe at the concentration we ordered. Someone tripled it in this one shipment only. This was done on purpose. The trail led, after a week of quiet checking by Kara and one uncomfortable conversation with a merchant's clerk, to a supplier who had once done steady business with Rink's household. A debt of old loyalty called in for one last act of spite, small enough to look like an accident, cruel enough to matter. A court can strip a man of his title, Matthew told Sylvana, quietly, after hearing the report. It cannot strip him of everyone who still owed him a favor. Then we keep checking every shipment the way we check every stitch, she answered. That is the price of being worth attacking. Then we stop using that dye immediately, Matthew said. No matter how many orders we lose, the village's health matters more than any contract. The decision cost the house several lucrative orders, but the village saw in it the thing that finally cemented their trust in him, that he had not hesitated once, choosing between profit and the lives of his people. The affected weavers recovered within a month, and Trevin, feeling responsible for missing the tampering sooner, developed a safe alternative dye that later became fashionable among nobility in its own right. I was not scared of the illness itself, Pia told Matthew, while recovering, weak but smiling. I was scared of letting you and the village down, of not becoming who you believe I can be. You are already who I believe you can be, Pia, he told her. Not because you never make mistakes, but because every time you get back up and keep going. That is what mastery actually means. The whole affair left the village with one lasting understanding, that a title stripped in a throne room does not strip a man of every hand still willing to work for him in the dark, and that peace, once won, still has to be kept. A year later, Kaliris was unrecognizable, a thriving town with its own craft school, trade offices from 3 kingdoms, and a factory still growing to meet demand across the continent. Aranea negotiated trade as well as Dorn ever had. Kara ran a scouting network protecting caravans across the whole region. Liz commanded a guard split evenly between humans and spiders. Pia ran the school, training a new generation. Mira ran an infirmary with a waiting list weeks long. Zabrina became the first ambassador in the continent's history to represent the arachnid race at 3 royal courts at once. Sayla, who had once traded gossip for gold without understanding its weight, became the workshop's most exacting inspector of new apprentices, since no one checked loyalty as carefully as the one who remembered its cost. Gevis returned too, not as an owner, but as a teacher, passing on the good he knew and learning honesty again alongside his students. Every autumn, Helga sent the first barrel of the season's catch, as a gift no gold could measure, and Countess Valan became a regular, unofficial ambassador for the house among her own nobility. In the evenings, when the trading quieted, Matthew still returned to the small workshop where it had all begun, now surrounded by an entire factory, but just as quiet and homely as ever. He sat at the old loom, remembering his grandfather's words. Thread does not forgive haste. Rush it, and it snaps exactly when you need it most. He never rushed, not once in 2 years. Not in his craft, not in his relationships, not in his revenge. Where another man in his place might have built a kingdom on blood and fear, he built his on trust, patience, and honest work. Years later, at the same craft school, spiderlings and human children grew up side by side, with no memory of a time when meeting a stranger meant blood instead of a handshake. Pia, now mentor to a new generation, opened her first lesson with the same words her own teacher once gave her. Thread does not forgive haste, she told her students. Rush it, and it snaps exactly when you need it most. That rule applies to more than just sewing. The legend of the tailor, banished as worthless, who answered not with revenge, but by building an entire age, spread across the continent in dozens of versions, embellished and distorted in turn. But it always ended the same way. Strength does not have to come from a sword or a spell. Sometimes it comes from a needle, patience, and the willingness to see a person where everyone else sees only a monster.
A checked box of red ink once ended in a burned workshop and a stolen bag of silk, and neither one was ever the whole story. What made Matthew worth following was never the accident that dropped him into another world, and not that his hands were faster than anyone else's. It was that he refused every shortcut the system offered him, that he built power out of sincerity instead of extracting it, and that when he finally had the leverage to crush the men who had once thrown him out, he chose to mend the tear instead and let the seam hold. A country or a workshop or a life is safest when the people who run it can still be questioned by the ones who make the thread with their own hands.